Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. We all survived the weather storm.
We did.
We got to the office today.
Yes.
Good to see you.
Good to see you, Dr. Paul.
Yeah. High and dry now.
High and dry, well, yeah, we need some sun.
So we'll go back to what we've been working on our coronavirus intrigue and the lies they tell, the falsehoods, the over-exaggeration of what's going on. And today we're going to talk a little bit about whistleblowers. We like whistleblowers. That's why we like people like Assange and Edward Snowden. Too bad they get such a bad rap.
Yeah.
If the whistleblowers are talking about the government, they don't get very far. But these are the bureaucrats that are messing things up. But the whistleblowers who's been behind the scenes, they're very helpful.
Yeah.
The one that we really want to talk about, I've been fascinated with this one article that just came out yesterday. Ralph Lopez wrote it up about a whistleblower, Dr. Mike Yaden, I think that's the way you pronounce it, worked at he was worked with Pfizer.
Yeah.
And he's been at this for a long time, but he came out and said, pandemic is over. It's almost like, where was it? And once again, but he concentrates and works real hard on the details of the testing. We probably won't be able to go into the minute details of it, but it's a pretty clear article, and I would suggest some people, if they can find that article, we might be able to tell them where to find it. It's really a good article to go over to show that the testing is such a fake. And so much has been done that is based on testing that was totally unreliable. There was one case where there were 400 cases in Boston that were completely wrong, and they had to throw them out. And yet they keep using the same test. And this is what he emphasized: false test, and then they go off overboard in lockdown, and it's such a distortion, such a joke about data. It's not providing data. It's not presenting the truth. It's all biased. And the question, of course, we continue to ask is, who can we really put the guilt on? Because there's a lot that are complicit with this, and a lot of victims. I still feel like you have also expressed the unhappiness we see when the people who suffer, the kids, and the people who lose their jobs. And it's not going to come roaring back, because it looks like just the sense that I get from this type of stuff is always, well, even if you guys are right, we have to be prepared. It's bad, and it's going to get worse, and the flu season is coming. And they make excuses, but we get no help from major media. So re-educating the public and trying to reassure them is a job. But lo and behold, we might even get to mention it today. Some of the statistics show that the people are waking up, and that's good. In spite of all the propaganda, the people are starting to wake up. So that's why I've always considered the principle of the First Amendment is so crucial. It's being allowed to talk and express ourselves. And of course, I always thought the internet would be our bosom buddies on this, and yet we can get blackballed on social media too. Yeah. So, but anyway, we have tools, and we've had efforts, and people are changing their minds, and that, of course, pleases me.
Yeah, Dr. Yaden, he's an insider. He's a scientist. He spent 16 years at Pfizer, and he rose to the level of vice president of a company and its chief science officer. So this is a scientist. He knows what he's talking about, and it's a pretty explosive interview. He's done a couple of scientific studies as well with some colleagues, but the conclusions are pretty amazing. He says basically half to almost all of the PCR tests are giving false positives. So that's why we're seeing this case-demic with no deaths following. There's so many false positives. He said the threshold for herd immunity may be way lower than they're claiming. We may have actually reached it. And here's a quote that he said: "Given the shape of all the important indicators in a pandemic, hospitalization, ICU utilization, and deaths, the pandemic is fundamentally over." He published a recent scientific study, How Likely is a Second Wave?, where he also talks about something really important, because they tried to portray the Sun Belt spike that happened in June and July here in Texas and Florida and Arizona as a second wave. He says, in fact, there is no second wave. There has not been a second wave for coronaviruses like MERS and SARS. It doesn't happen that way. And in fact, what it is just different geographical parts of the country and the world see an increase and decline at different rates because of, for a variety of things. So there's plenty of other things that he said we'll talk about, but it's really fascinating to see an insider, and in fact, we have another one we'll talk about in a second, two insiders blowing the whistle on what's going on.
Well, he has quoted a story, and we have quoted this story too, but I want to mention it again because I see what he was trying to do, and is to tell the truth, and that is to discredit the lies. And this testing is the big lie, but we've known that for a while, even statistically and everything else, when they claim it's just a mistake and whatnot. But this is the one that we've used before, but this should be enough to make people wake up and say, why does anybody believe this stuff? And the most famous incident of PCR test unreliability, of course, was when the president of Tanzania revealed to the world that he had covertly sent samples from a goat, a sheep, and a pawpaw fruit to a COVID test lab. They all came back positive for COVID.
Yeah.
Why shouldn't that just blow their cover? And yet, they're still using them all, and they don't go back and say, "Oh, we can't handle this." And now that there are more people coming forth on the testing and how unreliable. They're not really testing what they're supposed to be testing, and yet all the decisions made for lockdown have been based on these falsehoods. And his article even mentioned that they thought we were, at that point of herd immunity, and that. He cites also Sweden, how well they have done, and we should be looking at that, maybe and change policy. But first, we have to change the minds and get the attention of our governor.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to do. Well, there are three problems with the test, as the doctor pointed out as well. The first, there's a lot of tests that were made in China. A lot of them are putting out false positives. I know it's shocking, but not the best quality stuff coming over from China. The second is the threshold for taking a positive is skewed. It's skewed toward finding positives. The third is also what it tests for, the PCR test. And we've talked about it before. The doctor talks about it as well, that he says it simply tests for the presence of partial RNA sequences that are present in an intact virus. He points out some subjects remain PCR positive long after the ability to culture a virus from swabs has disappeared. So these people are in no sense sick, they're in no sense actual cases, and they are not communicable. They don't spread the virus, but these tests pick up these little tiny drops of the RNA sequences and say, oh, positive, positive, positive.
Now, he's picked up on this, and we've used this same argument too, because most of this nonsense got started by, I think he's a Britisher, Professor Neil Ferguson.
Yeah.
And because if you don't refute the people who started all this, it's a little more difficult. But he came down very, very hard on Ferguson. That he misled all the calculations and the scaremongering, and he promoted all the lockdowns. And we've heard less from him, so I don't know whether they've chased him off or not. But but it's more or less conceded that Ferguson really stirred the pot on this one.
Yeah, it was the most colossally incorrect model in the history of modeling. First of all, he said, if you do everything I say, we'll only have 500,000 dead in the UK, and we'll only have 2 million dead in the US. Of course, that's completely wrong. But it was used to justify all of the lockdowns, all of the hysteria, and everything that's followed, even to this day, this false. And he actually still stands behind it. He said, I actually even underestimated it. So I don't know what he's smoking out there, but it's something weird. But I sent over an additional JPEG. Maybe we can put this up, because this was in the article. This is from the European CDC. This really tells you everything you need to know. On the top, the red line is daily confirmed cases. Look how it goes up and up. But the important thing is the bottom line, daily confirmed deaths. It's flat. There was a little increase late March, early April. Essentially, it's completely flat. This is the pandemic right here. And this is what's used to justify continuing to lock people down in the U.S. and especially the U.K. and elsewhere, forcing people to wear masks, forcing people to do crazy things like social distancing. This is what's used to justify it, and there just simply is no justification when you just simply look at the numbers.
Right. You know, this also made a good point, and that is the comparison and the projections, like we've heard from Ferguson, they would frequently use the 1918 flu epidemic. And this author says completely irrelevant. You know, it has nothing to do with coronavirus. It's not a coronavirus. The world conditions were different. The geography was different. I mean, it was so different that it's not very scientific to even say, well, this is what happened in 1918, and that's why we're projecting millions of people are going to die. But you know, there are signs that people are speaking out and challenging this, the lockdown. But there's also more physicians getting together and being heard. And I think the more the merrier, and that's what we need. So I hope we see more people not being reticent and but just speaking out and getting the attention. But you know, and you mentioned this yesterday, and that is sometimes there's a lot of people out there just waiting for somebody like this to stand up that's very credible. It makes you more comfortable because, you know, when you have a thought and you say, well, this is my instinct, this is what I said, but I don't know this for sure. But when you know that somebody else has come along, it's a comfort level. But right now, the opposition has been controlling this. The comfort comes from, whether or not you have your mask on, and they make you feel, a lot of people, I can't imagine very many people say, this mask thing is really neat. And I'm glad I'm participating in it. At the beginning, you heard that. But now it's only the comfort level of not antagonizing, fighting, and waiting in line to get into a store and all this stuff. So I think the attitudes out there, we just need to have some more ignition there to galvanize people.
Well, there still are some pretty weird people. You know, I came into the studio today and a woman was driving by, her window completely rolled down by herself in the car with her mask covering her face. So, but we want to talk about another whistleblower too. And we call them whistleblowers sort of in a loosely defined way because this is William Cruz. And we first saw this on Bob Wenzel's Target Liberty, which everyone should go to daily. But William Cruz was a public affairs specialist at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. That's where Fauci hangs out. So he was there in the process. What he did, though, is he was writing under a pseudonym at the conservative website called Red State. And, of course, that's not allowed. You're not allowed to be conservative if you're over there. He was exposed by the Daily Beast, which is a beast. But the stuff that he had been writing all summer about it was from a position of being there in the middle of the room, watching everything happen, and his conclusions were incredible. First of all, this is not going to shock anyone that Fauci was an attention-grubbing and media-whoring person and a mask Nazi. We've seen that. But here's something else that he wrote. He said, this whole thing has been a total fraud insofar as a policy response to the virus from day one. There has never been a need for a lockdown. There has never been a need for wearing masks. And he goes on to say something that's so poignant, and this is what we want to try to get across to people that you can resist. This is what he wrote in July. A government that can force you to wear a purely symbolic face mask in a prescribed manner can make you wear a yellow Megan David and get on the boxcar. And that is very poignant, and that's something to remember.
He does not mince words, and he sees this as so necessary for the people to wake up. But that is very good, and really we have two good whistleblowers here because they're authentic. We can sort of postulate what we think is going on, but when they've been behind the scenes, somebody that's worked in these companies or these bureaucracies for years and years, and they probably have had to suffer through it a long time before they decide, enough is enough, and they break out and finally come down. But no, I think that's well on its way. I think that's going to help us and give more credibility to our argument that there is a lot of fake news out there and lying and whatnot. I wanted to, I wanted to finish a quote on that one article that we talked about earlier, and this is this was trying to understand what was going on, and his conclusion was, mass hysteria is never accidental. Now, I believe that, but benefits someone.
Yeah.
And the only question left, who's benefiting?
Yeah.
But our listeners and supporters, I think they have a strong opinion about that. They have voiced their opinion, and they're different. But the one thing we can say, they're not friends of liberty.
Yeah, yeah.
They're the opposition. They're the ones who would like to control us, in a political way, and they want to control power, and they want to control the money, and that's really what this is all about. But we're at a crossroads right now, because if we don't break this up and they move into the next season, because they're going to lose the fight on trying to prove that we're wrong scientifically, because we're right on the science of this, but that doesn't mean they're going to stop.
No.
They're just going to be moving on to the next epidemic and create more noise, and people will still be out there and frightened, because it'll be a new thing. Maybe this is the real thing. But we're going to keep plugging away on trying to find these friends that are willing to reveal the truth to us.
Yes, indeed. Well, it shouldn't be a surprise then, the next thing we're going to cover. Consider the fact that the truth is breaking out, despite the fact that they're doubling down on the lies. And this is the continuing monitoring by Axios Ipsos of the public's attitude toward the vaccine. Let's put up that next graph. This is incredible. Percent of people who say they are likely to get the first generation COVID-19 vaccine as soon as it's available. Look, across the board, Democrat, Republican, and the total, look at how it's absolutely plummeting since mid-August to where we are here toward the end of September. The support for getting that initial vaccine is just not there. Only 13% of the people they surveyed said they'd be willing to try it immediately. So, if I were advising the president, I would tell him to don't sell this as a silver bullet, because Americans do not want the vaccine.
And there's a flat out 60% plus says that absolutely no, and I think that is growing. So that we have to keep after. So we need to move on to our next little
I think we got some good news from Pennsylvania, right?
Oh yes, the governor up there. Used to be my state up there. Boy, what a mess that is. No, he's fine. He gave those horrible regulations, and then we had somebody oppose it, and they won it in court.
Yeah.
And now and they said that you can't do this. The judge ruled unconstitutional.
Yeah.
You can't do all this stuff. And it was like a breath of fresh air to hear that judge recite, his finding. But I don't think the governor was too happy with that, so he moved for a stay of this to cancel that move out, and that's where they are now. But they will appeal it. They're not going to give up easy on this, because if this holds, this whole thing falls apart. To think that this should be debated on whether or not the governments, any government level, can arbitrarily just line up and say, well, you can be open, but you can't be open. I don't like you, I like you. And just arbitrarily lay down these regulations and to roll over for this. But it's always fear. Yeah. It's fear and hysteria. People are going to die if you don't do this. And that's what the governor's still using. He's using the argument, if we don't get to put these regulations on, a lot of people are going to die. But the whole problem is we have the evidence to show that if you keep putting these regulations on, there are more people going to die. And I think the numbers support that position, that there's more deaths now from the lockdowns than it would have been from the virus. I don't even think it's a contest anymore.
Yeah, it is important. I mean, it's a federal judge. We talked about it last week. A federal judge ruled it was unconstitutional to do what Governor Wolf was doing in Pennsylvania. He said, I need to stay, put this aside. And they refused to even hear it, and they cited a number of different inconsistencies that led them. So that is good news, and let's hope not only does that stay as it is, but to be repeated throughout the country. We need a little bit of some federal judges here in Texas making the same rulings. I had a couple of small things. One of them, because you were talking about people will die. Well, yes, as we said yesterday, we talked about the diabetes deaths and the diabetes problems. Let's put up this next one, and this is not going to surprise anyone. It shouldn't surprise anyone. This is from The Week. It was a few days ago it came out. Coronavirus isolation may be contributing to thousands of excess dementia deaths in the U.S. And I highlighted this one part. The Washington Post's analysis of federal data found that 13,200 more deaths than expected compared with previous years over this period of lockdown in the U.S. So it's the isolation, it's the depression, it's lack of contact with loved ones. You know, people that have dementia and Alzheimer's, they do benefit from having that contact. It slows the process of decline. So being denied that for months and months on end, you're seeing thousands of people die because of the lockdowns.
Think about the point you just made compared to the point that some will twist it around and say, and use the false figures that show how many people died because the government didn't have enough lockdown fast enough, and that person is guilty of the crimes that they can't prove one bit, and here at the same time, what they have done has literally caused more deaths. So that is a big problem, I'll tell you. But I think that as time goes on, the more and more we're going to find out about that.
Yeah, well, I was going to run through a couple of quick things, and this is one that hits a little close to home with my son, should be at A&M, he's studying from home. Let's look at this next one. So they launched a random testing program for Texas A&M students because this was going to be the next tragedy, the next horror. All of the college students are going to drop dead. Well, what they're actually finding out is that the overall positivity rate is not only declining, it's almost disappearing. The overall positivity went down from 3.2 to 1.6%. They're testing as much as they can, and they're just simply not finding students that have it, that are sick, or anything. And you're not going to believe this. We just got an email from the president of this university. They're going to keep doing this in the spring semester, online classes. They're not going to let the kids back. It's amazing. Well, let's look at something that actually is a problem. Let's look at this next clip and compare the two. We talk about college students. This was a good tweet from a doctor. U.S. college campus deaths related to alcohol poisoning, 1,800 annually. U.S. college student deaths from COVID-19, less than 10, with 0 in the 2021 school year. And for this, they are shutting down the universities, shutting down the colleges. I want to do a couple real quick things on let's look at that next one really quick, Dr. Paul. This is interesting. The hardest lockdown in the world was Argentina. They locked down in March, and look what happened to their deaths. If these lockdowns are so wonderful, then why do they have one of the worst death rates in the world? Let's look at the next one really quick. This is cheating in Texas. We talk about this a lot. Those two gray areas you see below, those are legacy tests that are thrown in to make it look worse. The reality is only 1.4% positivity. They're cooking the books. Here's another one. Let's go to the next one real quick. This is the report from yesterday from our friend Alex Rodriguez. 39 dates revised. These tests are 4 weeks old, and some of them are as old as 6 weeks old. But the reported fatalities are down 41.7% when you look at day of death. And that's important. They're laundering the death certificates. Governor Abbott's doing nothing about it. Let's do the next one really quick. And this is my final thing, Dr. Paul, reminding our parents, look into homeschooling, look into the Ron Paul curriculum, ronpaulhomeschool.com. You're going to get some good bargains. Tom Woods is going to give you some discounts. It's self-paced. The kids love it, and they learn a lot of good stuff.
That sounds like a good program.
Yeah.
They're very good. You know, I want to close with a little bit of a comment about the medical industrial complex. You know, J&J now is the fourth company to come up with a vaccine that's almost ready. And they're Russian. There's this medical emergency completely concocted. But the medical emergency motivates people to open up their wallets, our wallets, at the force of the politicians. And it's never a big argument in Washington. How many big arguments have we heard in the last 6 months about how much money we're going to give to the drug companies? But they're out there. Are they getting $1 million or $2 or so, or $1 billion? Billions of dollars they're getting. And it's a big race, and they really probably don't even care on the long run. how many people's lives are they going to save? But it is a racket. It's a racket that goes on, and it's been known for a long time. You have the drug industry, the insurance industry, the medical industries. All of these people, are motivated to keep things going. And of course, the political chaos is also worked in there too, because the same people who are the crony capitalists are creating bad conditions, which invite, guess what, the Marxist type people to come in and grab hold of the chaos of that. So the Marxists are very much aware of this, and it's an argument for taking over. But what this is it sounds like socialists are lining up to take advantage of the chaos, and I think that is true. But it's not going to be, this is my just assessment, my estimation, it's not going to be like Soviet communism. It's going to be more of a fascist system, because we have built this mess on the combination and the cooperation of crony capitalists with socialist type of programs. And this is why you see so many of these people are getting big money, from so-called capitalists. You wonder why do these rich capitalists support, some of these left-wing movements? It's because that's the way, crony capitalism works, because it morphs into fascism. That's what we're on the verge of getting, and that is why hopefully we get the truth out and people say enough is enough. We don't want more government. They don't save lives, and they make us a lot poorer, and it's much better to concentrate on the cause of liberty and a sense of responsibility that we should assume. That is a much better way to go than assuming, well, just print more money. And right even today as we speak, they're printing money like crazy and always adding to it. But there's really not a contest up there. It's supported in a bipartisan fashion, and it's a consequence, as far as I'm concerned, of 100 and some years of indoctrination by our universities and all the stuff that has gone on. The people go along with it, and that's why it's probably 95% of the people in Congress that I met. Some of them may come across as decent individual in a social sense. You can talk to them, but not on these issues, because they have been indoctrinated by a philosophy of personal liberty and economics. That means that they want to control things. People, they told me, are too dumb to take care of themselves. It's up to us, the great politicians, to take care of them, and that is their responsibility. So it's that attitude which is the real sickness in this country, but it's failing. It gives us an opportunity to say, which way do you want to go? Do you want to go with more and more, turn us all into Venezuela and the different horrors that come from socialism? Or are we going to say, maybe the founders had a point or two. Maybe individuals should take care of themselves. Maybe local people and churches and families should resort to responsibility, rather than saying, government will take care of me. They'll send me a check, and never ask the question, where does it come from? Well, it comes not only from the people's wallets eventually, it comes from their personal liberty. That's where the real tragedy is. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.